Da 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 bum ba da bum bum ba dum bum bum ba dee da 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 dum la da 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 dum da 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 dum. Can you see that? Welcome, whoever, wherever, whenever you are. Thank you for showing up. I'm Denise Matteau, and yeah, I started another project, but it's not really a project. This is just a little experiment. I have recently discovered, as you know, if you've seen my Cathedral Window playlist, folded quilt blocks. And Cathedral Window, of course, is all folding. One of the lovely things about a folded quilt is that all of the fabric creates its own batting, basically. You don't add batting to it because you have so many layers of fabric. Now, you may have seen something like this on a pillow, and this could easily be turned into a pillow if I don't do anything else with it, although I have more pillows than I need. But these blocks can also be attached together. I'm going to show you the whole method in a few minutes. Let me pause for a second. Okay, we're back. I'm going to show you the whole method in a few minutes. Now, I'm doing this like I do everything by hand. I'm a kitchen table quilter. I did actually at one time work in a sewing job. Actually, I had several jobs, kind of in a row. I went through several factories back in the 1980s. Wonderful jobs. But the sewing machine to me is work, okay? 8-hour day. You got a boss and a paycheck. I'm not getting a paycheck. I don't need a boss. And I enjoy sewing at the kitchen table because while I'm sewing at the kitchen table, I've also got something simmering on the stove. And I can watch and listen to videos. I can't listen to anything if I got a sewing machine because I can't hear over the noise. And I don't want to wear headphones. Anyway, enough with the excuses. The fact is I just plain like hand sewing. So I'm doing this with the hand sewing method. I'll be putting a link in the description along with the shout-outs because the Mom and Pop Quilt Shop, and they are, shout out to them, at MPQS. That's their channel thing if you want to find them. And I'll put it, like I said, I'm going to put the shout-outs. They have a video up from 3 years ago showing how to do this by machine. Now, the thing about doing it by machine or even by hand is because you're going through so many layers, it can be difficult. And I'll show you the tricks to make it not so difficult. I want to show you a little bit about the history of pine cone quilts.
Also called a cocklebur quilt, a pine burr quilt, a target quilt because of the center looks like a target, bullseye also, and prairie points because these little triangles people also call prairie points. But the pine cone got the name because of the shape of a pine cone. If you look at that brown pine cone, it has that circular pattern going on, and that's how it really got its name. This quilt is...
Now that is Betty Ford Smith, who's recently written a book on the everything about this quilt, the tradition, the heritage. She makes these quilts herself. She talks about the lady who was her mentor, was like a lady in her late 90s, and somebody had said to her, oh, you like quilts and stuff, you should see what she does. No, nobody was doing this. It was like really going to be a totally forgotten art. If that lady had, I mean, how much longer did she have? She was in her late 90s. Betty Ford Smith refers to her as Ms. Sue, but that wasn't her real name, but that was a name she went by, I guess. But anyway, Ms. Sue was not even really willing to teach. She didn't trust anybody. And Betty Ford Smith won her trust enough to be adopted as an apprentice, and so the entire practice was passed on. That's how close we come to losing things. Really, if Betty Ford's friend hadn't said, "Oh, by the way, you ought to meet this lady," and if Betty Ford hadn't taken it upon herself to get past Miss Sue's reluctance, we wouldn't have this. We would have Prairie points. Everyone knows about Prairie points because they're mostly used as a single line of triangle folded edging on quilts. That's the way I've seen them. And also you see them used on pillow, decorations and stuff. But nothing to the extent of the pine cone quilt. That is not only an African American tradition on the East Coast, in the Carolinas. They picked it up alongside the Lumbee tribe of Indians, Native Americans. And there were several, in my playlist, there were several videos from them teaching how they do it. And now I'm going to show you how I do it. First of all, I know I did a few things wrong, air quotes, different on this. For one thing, the Prairie points, what I've seen, there's two ways of folding. They'll fold in a rectangle and then fold down so that you get a wide-bottomed triangle, a right angle and you can put it in that way. Or they'll fold it like so. But the way I do it, I fold the square point to point, and then I take it and I fold it up the middle, and I'm careful to pull that point sharp. Now, this is where it's going to be sewn. Let me get it, and I use a very lightweight piece of fabric. This is like a really very lightweight, worn out old sheet. And I started this. I'm not going to say it as if I do it all the time, because I'm sure the next one I do is going to be different. Try different things. But this rose, to make this rosette, I started by simply putting 4 of these, one in each corner, and then 2, and sewed them in, and then went back and sewed 2. See? So I got the 4 corners, then I sewed 2, then as I continued around I sewed 1 and another, and I just kept going around, and it did get a little uneven, but it's a natural flower appearance, so I didn't worry if it got like their wider space here and narrower space. I tried to make it as even as possible going around. Then I topped it off with a yo-yo, because the center, of course, you have some raggedness. Now there's another style that you're going to see most of the videos. They show it, you start at the center and work out, and all the points are pointing inward. So you don't get a messy center. And you put some binding around it, and it's done. But I tried to do that, and I just couldn't get it to work right. So then I tried this, and I decided I like this. Now what you do also, when you're sewing it to the foundation piece, you leave about ½ an inch loose fabric, because later on I'm going to take probably something like this and put sashing, because I'm going to do a lot of these different kinds of folded quilt pieces, quilt blocks. And I'm going to do it all in muslin. This is just a very loose weave, like the kind you can get like 10 yards for $35 or something, somewhere in that neighborhood. That's what I'm using, because I don't want to worry about the colors and stuff. I want the structure. So my plan for it is maybe a few yellow spots where I need to cover a center or something like that. I'm going to do a Manx log cabin, which is where you do the log cabin block, but instead of sewing it like any piece block, you are folding the fabric and going around with folds until it actually ends up creating the same layered effect you have here. And I'm going to do one of those. There's the Manx log cabin, this pine cone rosette. I'm going to try one of the inward pointed pine cones. There were some others. The cathedral window, of course, I'm already working on that. My plan is to put up, to end up with something like a sampler, but instead of it being all different pieced patterns like we usually see, it's going to be all different three-dimensional folded blocks. There's all kinds of design possibilities with this. I've got two images in my mind that I've got to do. If I use the folded log cabin, the Manx log cabin method, alongside this method, there's also, I'm thinking how this lends itself to like the scales of a fish or a dragon or a serpent. So one of the images I have in my head is a Chinese New Year dragon. I would love to make a wall hanging like that. Another image I have in my head is Jonah and the whale, and having this kind of stuff all around the fish and the wavy, just all kinds of things you can do with folded blocks. What was the other one? Oh, a drawing I've seen. It's by the artist Jonathan Pageau, P-A-G-E-A-U. If you like artwork, you should look that guy up. He is dedicated to making wood carvings of various biblical things. He's an Orthodox icon carver, actually. One of his most beautiful pieces is St. Michael defeating the Satan, which is in the form of a dragon. And it's a drawing that he makes the drawings and then he makes the wood carving, and he publishes both. So you should look up Pageau's studio. He has a whole website. Anyway, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking, I wonder if I could do something similar to what he's done there. And of course, I'm sure yourself, you're thinking, oh, mermaids. There's another one that this would be fun with. So anyway, I'm all over the place with that. So I said I was going to show you how I did it. First, you have your foundation cloth, okay? And then all I did was I cut a 3-inch wide strip of muslin. You can see it's a loosely woven muslin. Fold it like so. Get this thread out. Let me pull this down. Okay. Leaving that extra space for when I attach it to other blocks. I picked up the Japanese method. They don't use knots when they sew. They sew by hand. But instead of putting a knot into it, you would just do a back stitch. and then a running stitch. They call it a running back stitch, where you do a few forward, one back, it locks it in, because it's not basting. If it were basting, you want it loose so you can pull the thread out easily. But you're not going to pull these threads out. You want them to be anchored in there. Now, another thing to think about is using a much flimsier cloth. What do you call it? Those netty kind of curtain panels, are very translucent type of thing, or organza or organdy. Any kind, I mean, things you probably would never think of using in a quilt. But this is not square. Let me cut it square. You can see I'm not running to my cutting board for a rotary cutter, although that's going to change, because today I took delivery on a full-size ironing board. I'm not showing it tonight because I just finished setting it up, and tomorrow I'm going to do that. It's really lovely. I'm setting up an ironing and cutting station over in my front hall. So I've got this one. Now I'm going to sew this one. I've got to get myself in the habit of knowing exactly where the camera is when I do this. Now, because it is such loosely woven cloth, I don't have any trouble pushing the needle through all these layers. Now, I'm not going to continue doing all the corners. I'm just going to show you, having all the four corners done, the next step is to put them here. Now, I want to cover that. So my seam is going to be inside half an inch in. I maybe put this seam a little bit too close, so I'm going to just cover it that way. And the strength of the seam, as long as you've got it so that it won't pull out, you know, these big stitches might seem like they're not strong enough, but the other layer is going to put another seam through the same cloth, so it's actually going to be sewn down with two seams. Now, let me push that. Can you see? Yeah, you can see there's a, I should have used a different color thread. There's a thread line there. So I'm taking my little folded triangle, and I'm putting the edge of it over that thread, like that. Of course, it's a lot easier to do this when you're not thinking about camera angles and stuff, so Believe me, it goes fast once you get going. And of course, it's one of those things where you can pick it up and try it out and say, well, I'll only make one and I'll use it for a trivet under a hot dish or a pillow. Or you keep going and you may have a wall hanging or maybe, just a throw. And then you keep going and suddenly you've got a quilt. Okay, I'm going to stop here on this one, but you see the first layer is started. And if I wasn't fussing around and talking, you could see that I would have had the whole circle done by now. And I think there are about 50 points in this block, which is probably going to be fairly typical. I wouldn't really want to make them any larger. I gave a shout out to Mom and Pop's Quilting. Let me find that video. They talk about continuous...
What if there was a technology where humans
just a
could live
minute.
like animals by pretending to be an animal?
No, we don't need that. Okay. Quilt projects from 3 years ago. She shows... Oh, darn it. Okay. She shows doing it by machine. Now, nope, my thing is, my stupid camera is not cooperating, so I can't show. I'm going to put the link in. Anyway, that's the Mom and Pop thing. They show how to do it in a straight line. So she's doing like you would go across the whole top of a quilt and make several rows of them. And that would be interesting to do with different effects where you could do frames with it. You could make framed pieces. It's just something to think about, like we all need one more thing. We need everybody needs another UFO, don't you? Oh, well. I'm going to have to do a video. I've got a UFO here that I just pulled out because I finished my Groundhog Day UFO, which is now on the bed. Big, heavy, warm quilt. I've got another one that I had started out. Let's see here. This one is almost a failure. I started out, I was burrow stitching, but I made the rows of stitches, or kantha. It's more like the kantha stitching. The Indian of India, their method of making a quilt, which is just all straight lines of maybe 2 or 3 layers of cotton, because it's a quilt for a warm country. Well, I made them too close together, and I ended up shrinking. I mean, the whole thing is just bunching together. And I don't want to tear it out because it's too much. So I think I'm just going to finish the end of it. And if it's not comfortable to use it, I'll just I think I'll fold it up and make a bath mat out of it. If nothing else, you can throw it on the floor outside the shower, right? Or maybe, now I don't want to, I've got a neighbor who's doing the feral cat thing, and I was just thinking, well, I could give it to him for his feral cats, because they're gathering around trying to keep warm. But I don't want to participate in that. I know that right now we've only got a half a dozen out there, but very soon we'll have animal control coming out, because it will get crazy. But that's all you can do. I mean, I'm not going to worry about it. Anyway, thank you for showing up. Hope you enjoyed. And see you next time. Denise Matteau, over and out.